Alright guys, Dr. Quinn Henoch here from Juggernaut Training Systems and Dark Side Strength. We're sitting here at part 2 of our conversation about muscle flexibility, shortness, tightness, and when we should stretch and when we shouldn't. So in part 1 we talked about the notion of muscle shortness, which is more of a structural issue where the structure is actually shortened, and then tightness, which is more of a nervous system driven thing where your muscle is being sent a signal to have increased tone. So we talked about how a lot of people think that their muscles are short when really they are tight. And so for example, somebody who's got tight hamstrings all the time, yet they stretch every single day, may not actually have a shortening or a structural problem, but their nervous system is sending a signal to that muscle that's tight for a reason. So here are some tests and some corrections that can be performed for hamstrings, for example. When I'm talking about the slot, the active straight leg raise correction, I like the test a lot because it shows me a lot more than hamstring length. So I'll have people lie on their back, and typically when I do this, they're in this position where their ribs are popped up to the ceiling, and they lift their leg, and this is what they give me a lot of times. And they say, oh man, you know, I feel it in my hamstrings, but I also feel it in the front of my hip. Well, that doesn't make any sense because the front of the hip is shortening, so they shouldn't feel it there. That's more of an impinging position, or maybe their hip flexor is over dominant. So what we do is we change their position, flex one foot up, make the left arm a little shorter, cue their breathing, get their abs tight, and maybe I add a kettlebell for some extra stability here, and all of a sudden they can give me a straight leg raise. Okay? And then when we cue those things with both legs, retest, get the abs tight, all of a sudden they have more length. And I'm not contriving this. If I pop my ribs up and really arch hard, that's all the hamstring length I have. So you have to take position into account before you deem a muscle tight. And for those of you who always stretch and it doesn't help, maybe your position is off. And it's not necessarily a muscle shortness or a structural problem. Perhaps that muscle tightness is the only stability that your body is giving you at that time, so you actually need that. And in essence, you're playing tug of war with your nervous system. You lose that battle most times. So another thing that we see is people talk about a pinching in the front of their hips when they squat. And then a common correction for some people, and it works for some people, but for others, seem to think that stretching the hip flexor really hanging on the front of the joint capsule is going to help the hip when it's in this position. But if you think about it, the hip flexors are shortened in a squat. Everything gets short in the front, so you shouldn't feel a pinch because the hip flexor is tight. That pinch is a sensation of impingement. That means your femur and your pelvis are squishing tissues in between. That's a positional problem. So again, if we're going to address position, we can take a goblet squat, take a kettlebell, and do a counterbalanced goblet squat, meaning we can hold the bell in front of us about 8 to 12 inches, or kind of below, same distance away, get our pelvis underneath us, get our ribs down, and we can work on sitting straight down. And what you'll see is a lot of people's default pattern will be this. Yonk. Immediately overextend, anterior tilt, and that's where they get that pinch because they run out of room. So if you can keep that pelvis underneath you a little bit and sit straight down, if you feel yourself start to lose it, pull it back in, sit straight down. And I find in the clinic that a lot of people's hip impingement or hip tightness is what they thought was shortness goes away with just a positional change. So this is not to say I don't prescribe stretching to some people, because I do, I absolutely do. The lats, sometimes the hip flexors need to be stretched. I probably never prescribe hamstring, but it's a lot more rare when I actually assess them and see that either their position is off or their tightness is really a neurological based tone that's a message to their muscle as opposed to a structural change, because that takes a long, long time and is usually not the case. So I hope that makes sense, guys. I think we're going to have an article about this here in the near future, so stay tuned for that.